Hello, beautiful children. Wow, it's lovely to see you in my mind's eye. And now, finally, it's time to talk about the story of Pesach and the 10 plagues. I'm not going to say too much about the story because I know that you've learnt about it in school. But for those of you who haven't learnt about it in school, maybe don't go to a Jewish school, or haven't had the chance to really learn much about it, this is just a little synopsis, just a little bit of the story. So the story begins with our three fathers, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov, and they are promised by Hashem, by God, that the Jewish people will become a huge big nation, as big as all the stars in the sky and all the dust of the earth. And Jacob actually suffers a lot because he has to go away from his birthplace and work for not a very nice person called Lavan, his uncle, who tricks him time and time again. And Jacob has all the 12 Shvatim, the 12 tribes, and his favourite son, Joseph, he gives a coat of many colours. And the other brothers are all very jealous of Joseph and this coat of many colours. And they do something really naughty. They sell their brother into slavery for silver pieces. And Jacob doesn't know this and is led to believe that his son has been killed by a wild animal. But somehow he never really accepts it. And 22 years later, he's reunited with his son. Joseph is taken down to Egypt, sold into slavery, but becomes a viceroy, the second in command to King Paro, the pharaoh at that point. How does that happen? Well, it does. And while Joseph is in prison for a crime that he did not commit, he is able to interpret dreams of the people who are in the prison. And the one person that is saved eventually tells Paro about this Hebrew man who's able to interpret dreams. And Paro calls Joseph. Joseph is shaved and cleaned and get a haircut. He had long hair, we understand. And brought in front of the king after 12 years in prison, and says to the king, it's Hashem that will interpret your dreams. But he's very good at interpreting the dream and tells King Paro, well, this crazy dream that you're having about fat cows, 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 thin cows but not gaining any weight, and 7 grains of stalk being eaten by thin grains of stalk and not getting any fatter. That's because, King Paro, you're going to have a famine where there's not going to be any food. So it would be a really good idea, King Paro, if you would consider getting storehouses full of grain so that when the bad times come, you'll be ready for it. And King Paro thought, who else could be good enough to do this but you? And he makes Joseph second in command, the viceroy, and Joseph becomes a very, very important and influential person in Egypt. And eventually the brothers need food because there's a famine, and they come. Joseph recognizes them. To begin with, doesn't say anything, but then reveals himself to the brothers when he's sure that his father is alive and that Benjamin is safe and not being mistreated. And Jacob, after 22 years of being separated from his son, comes down to Egypt with 70 of the family. And this begins the story of the Jewish people in Egypt. Now, unfortunately, once all the brothers die and Jacob dies, they all live in a place called Goshen because the Egyptians consider lambs and sheep their gods, and they couldn't bear to see shepherds dealing with the sheep. So when all the brothers have died, then Vayakom Melech Hadash, a new king, or a king who didn't want to know about the wonderful things that Joseph had done, how he'd saved Egypt from a terrible situation. He decided, well, I don't want these Jewish people anymore. There's far too many of them. It's all very it's all very worrying. What's going to happen if an enemy would invade my country? Then these Jewish people could side with them. They could be too powerful. What can I do? Hava nischak malo. Let's outsmart these Jewish people. Let's trick them into becoming slaves. How do we do that? Well, very cunningly. We'll make them believe that they're serving their country, they're paying taxes, they're helping and contributing to the land. Only the tribe of Levi, we understand, did not take part at all in this. And so subsequently, the tribe of Levi never became slaves, as far as we understand. Tribe of Levi also always did Brit Milah, we understand. And so the Jews are tricked into becoming slaves. And the work is terrible. Men doing women's jobs, women doing men's jobs. After you finished your day job, still going into the field. Awful, awful work that made the Jewish people cry and cry and cry. But still they managed to have all these beautiful children. Even with King Paro being so terrible and actually telling the midwives, Shifra and Pua, aka Moshe, the leader who's going to be born, his mummy is Yocheved and his sister is Miriam, telling them, get rid of all the Jewish boys, but of course they don't. And then says, right, let's throw all the Jewish boys into the river. Shocking. But Moshe is born to Yocheved, hid for 3 months, we know that from the other video, and then put on the River Nile. Again, the River Nile is a deity, it's a god for the Egyptians. They believe in the River Nile. Because the water provides everything that they need for their life's source, for the root of their life. And King Paro thinks, right, well, I'm going to do the best that I can to get rid of these boys because somebody told me that a Jewish boy is going to be more powerful than me. And his daughter Batya comes down to the River Nile to bathe and spots the basket with the little boy crying in it, maybe, and Ki min hamayim shisuhu. I drew him out of the water. I'm going to call him Moshe. And funnily enough, Miriam, that's Moshe's sister, is watching, fetches Yocheved to feed Moshe because he will not take any milk from anybody else but his mummy. And Moshe ends up growing up in the palace as an Egyptian. The one Egyptian that might not be an Egyptian, that could be a big problem for an Egyptian king. The Hebrew is growing up in the palace. And one day, unfortunately, Moshe goes out, watches what's going on, and sees an Egyptian taskmaster beat a Jewish slave and hurt him. And so Moshe looks one way and the other, and then gets rid of the Egyptian taskmaster and buries him in the sand, and then has to run away to Midian because two other people, SPS, some people say, okay, also known as the Medrash, Datan and Aviram, they see what's happened and they're fighting, and Moshe tells them to stop fighting, and they say, why? Are you going to treat us like you treated the Egyptian taskmaster? Oh, the game is up. Moshe has to run away very, very quickly because Paro hears of it as well. The game is over. And when Moshe gets to Midian, he sees a lovely girl called Zipporah with beautiful dark skin by the well, and she's having some trouble with the shepherds at Midian. They're not being very nice to her and her sisters. And Moshe is a warrior, a mighty warrior, and he saves them from this horrible problem with the shepherds and ends up marrying Zipporah and has 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer, and is working as a shepherd for his father-in-law, Yitro. And while he's working for his father-in-law, as a shepherd, he's in the desert area there, and suddenly there's a burning bush, and the burning bush continues to burn, but it doesn't get bigger and it doesn't get smaller, it just continues the same way. Interesting, not actually burning the thorns inside the bush. Hashem quickly says, take off your shoes, it's a holy land. It's going to be where the Torah is going to be given. And Moshe does so. And Hashem tells him, well, you're the chosen one. I've chosen you to go back to Egypt and free the Jewish people. King Paro is going to let the Jewish people go, but it's going to take a while. And Moshe at first is very humble. Well, he is humble. He's the most humble leader that we ever had. But he tries to refuse to be the leader because he's got a speech impediment. We dealt with this in another video, because when he was very little, SPS, some people say, sitting on Paro's lap, he reached for the crown, and the magicians went, oh no, it's trouble, he's going to come after your crown. So they decided to put before him shiny, hot coal and cool, precious gold or jewels. See which one the boy would touch. And of course, Moshe was incredibly clever and was going to go for the gold or jewels, but Angel Gabriel moves his hand. He burns himself on the coal and puts his hand to his mouth to try and make it better. As he's only a baby, he's only very little. And from then on, he has a speech impediment. But actually, the last Parsha, the last Bible portion in the 5th book of the Torah, Devarim, is amazing, and Moshe is able to do the most amazing speeches. So Moshe goes back, meets his brother Aharon. Moshe is 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. And he is tasked with trying to get Paro to let the Jewish people go. He comes with signs. Paro's not bothered by the signs. Paro's not heard of this God Hashem, isn't interested, and says, not only will I not let the Jewish people go, but from now on, they're going to have to build their own bricks, make their own bricks, find the straw for their bricks, and I do not want one brick less. Goodness, doesn't sound like a very auspicious, not a very good start to Moshe's leadership, does it? It doesn't really look very good, and the people are crying and groaning from the pain and devastated with this new decision that not only have they got to work all hours of the day and the night, but now they've even got to find the straw to make the bricks for the storehouses. Terrible. So it's time for some punishment. Hashem decides that the Israelites are going to see the punishments that the Egyptians have, and it's time to do something about it. And we're still talking about it 3,300 years later. First plague. Let's see if I can do this. I have these glasses, but they're very tricky to put on and very tricky if they clip out of place. Can you see the first plague? The plague of blood, dam. And this plague is not started by Moshe because it involves water, and the water hid Moshe and saved Moshe for the beginning of his life. Dam. And a lot of the plagues actually last 7 days. Not all of them, a lot of them. Okay. First, all the water in the land of Egypt turned into blood. The Egyptians couldn't drink or cook or wash. The only way they could have water was by buying it from a Jew. Now, they also could dig under the riverbanks, so they could get water that way. And Paro, in the beginning, says, yes, all right, fine, I'll let them go. But then his magicians are also able to turn water into blood, and he hardens his heart and says, no, I'm not going to let the Jewish people go, even though his river Nile stank of dead fish, and even though the blood was only something that the Egyptians suffered. The Jews who were living in Goshen, they did not suffer with it at all. But still, Paro did not let the Jewish people go. First plague, done. Okay, let's look at the next plague. The plague of frogs. Svardea, frogs. Okay, again, this is not dealt with by Moshe. Hitting by the riverbank, out comes a big frog, SPS some people say, aka also known as the Medrash. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of frogs then came. Next came the frogs. They were all over the country, in beds and dishes, on tables and chairs and floors. Slimy frogs were everywhere. The sound of them croaking, rabbit, 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 drove the Egyptians crazy. Paro said, yes, get rid of it, get rid of them. I'll let the Jewish people go. But once the plague was ended, did he let the Jewish people go? No, he didn't let the Jewish people go. Next plague, plague number 3. Can we see what that is? One of my glasses bit is actually broken there. Hopefully you can see. Kinim, lice. And that as well was not created by Moshe. Aharon does that with the stick because the land had protected Moshe when he had killed the taskmaster. The lice came crawling up from the ground and into people's clothing and hair. The Egyptians were sick and sore from scratching and scratching and scratching. Paro said, okay, I'll let the people go. Did he let the Jewish people go? No, he was stubborn. He would not let the Jews go. And the lice was something that his Egyptians were unable to replicate. His Egyptians couldn't copy this plague because they could only copy plagues. They could only copy things that were a little bit bigger. And some of these lice were so tiny that they were unable to copy it at all. So that is the plague of lice. Next plague is coming along, Arov, wild animals. Let's see, wild animals. Can you imagine anything more scary coming into the palace, coming everywhere? Wild animals, hordes of savage animals and horrible creatures appeared. They ran wild, killing and destroying everything in their path. Again, only the Jews in Goshen were spared. Paro, yes, I'll let the Jewish people go, I'll let them go. Once the plague ended, did he let them go? No, of course he didn't let them go. So along comes another plague, plague number 5. What's that? The plague of pestilence. Very sad. The Egyptian animals, their cattle, their sheep, their pride of Egypt, their horses, anything not put in a stable, sadly died. And King Paro, yes, I'll let the Jewish people go. Did he let the Jewish people go? No. Once the plague was over, he did not let them go. Sometimes he'd say, I'll let the men go. Sometimes he'd say, I'd let this go, but I won't let them all go. I won't let the animals go. Well, all the Jewish people had to leave together, the men, the women and the children. They weren't going to let just some of them go. All the Jewish people needed to go together. Next plague, plague number 6, Shchin, boils. Hopefully you can see that, boils. Okay. Now everyone in Egypt was covered with horrible, painful blisters and boils. They couldn't stand, they couldn't sit, they couldn't do anything. The suffering was terrible, and still Paro refused to let the Jewish people go. But we do believe that Pharaoh's ministers, they were too embarrassed to ever come back to the palace again because they had suffered so greatly with their boils. It was embarrassing. They looked so awful. They couldn't come back to the palace anymore. Right. The next one, Barad, hail. Hail, goodness, fire and brimstone, hail. Then a horrendous hailstorm swept across Egypt. Enormous pieces of ice with flashes of fire inside destroyed all the flowers, the gardens and the trees. And also the crops. What crops were out? Well, we understand the crops of barley were out because there's going to be later crops. The crops of barley were out and they were all destroyed in the plague of hail. Next one I think we're going to come is the plague of Arbe, locusts. Goodness, Arbe, locusts. And the locusts come, millions and millions of them in great dark buzzing clouds. They swept across Egypt like a razor, mirroring down, moving down, gobbling on the grain and crops in the fields. So they would have got rid of the wheat harvest. Goodness, it's becoming a real disaster for the Egyptians. And they're starting to say to King Pharaoh, look, for goodness sake, help, we're going to have no country left. But King Pharaoh was obstinate and wouldn't let the Jewish people go. Plague number 9, choshech, darkness. Darkness. An inky black darkness, so dark that the Egyptians froze in it, covered the country. The Egyptians were glued to their chairs in the thick darkness or lay trembling in their beds. And in the meanwhile, the Jewish people were very busy going from house to house, looking to see where the Egyptians kept their valuables, their gold, their silver, their clothes, their jewels. And we also understand that 4/5 of Jewish people who weren't very good and didn't really want to leave Egypt and wanted to stay as slaves, they didn't trust in Hashem, they also perished at this point, so that the other good Jewish people could bury them and the Egyptians would not know that they had died. Thick, thick darkness. Still, King Paro doesn't listen, and this time says, "You get out, Moshe. If you see my face again, you're going to die." Well, actually, Moshe is not worried and says, "Yes, I will. You're right, but you're going to come and see me. I'm not going to come and see you." And Paro does actually try and find Moshe for this final plague, the 10th plague, Makat Bechorot, the killing of the firstborn. Now, in this plague, actually, we get the understanding of the name Pesach, because Hashem Pasach, he passed over all the houses of the Jewish people, marked by the blood of the Paschal lamb. The lamb was taken, or a goat, on the 10th of Nisan. It was the Egyptian god, and the Jewish people were very brave, taking it, tying it to their bedpost, and on the 4 days later, shechting the lamb so that it could be eaten, the Korban Pesach, on the 15th of Nisan at midnight with their clothes on, ready to leave Egypt. And that was the sign, blood smeared over the doorposts of their home, so that the angels of death would not touch any Jewish person. But the Egyptians, it didn't matter if it was a firstborn animal or a firstborn Egyptian or which house they lived in, they would be targeted. So finally at midnight on the 15th of Nisan, death struck the land of Egypt. Every firstborn man, boy and beast died. Egypt was filled with cries and crying. But in Goshen, the Jews were rejoicing. The angel of death passed over every Jewish house, and no Jewish person died. So in the middle of the night, Paro called for Moshe, went running for Moshe, and said, "Leave Egypt, you and your people and your women and your animals and your children and your possessions. Get out. I am setting you free." And the Jewish people were able to take gold and silver from the Egyptians, who gave it willingly, and their clothes, possessions, and off they went. We understand 600,000 men on their own, and probably in total, together with the women and children, 3 million. That's a lot. And off they went, and they left Egypt. But unfortunately, after they left, King Paro decided that he regretted letting them go, and he decided he was going to chase after them with all their expensive, beautiful chariots adorned with jewels. And they followed the Jewish people. Jewish people were told to backtrack. And there was Yam Suf, this huge river. How are they going to cross it? Well, we understand that there were walls of water safely for the Jewish people to walk through. Maybe even children could have an apple or a drink of water as they went through. But all the Jews got to the other side, and then as they got to the other side, the ground started shaking under them. The Egyptians came in more and more and more, all the chariots, even though the ground is beginning to lose way underneath them. And at that point, once all the Egyptians had come in, at that point all the water covered them again, and that was the end of the Egyptians. But the chariots with the jewels, the Jewish people were able to use those afterwards, the jewels. And so that was the miracle of the Yam Suf, the splitting of the Yam Suf. And in Shacharit we read the Az Yashir Moshe, we read the special song with Moshe, and Miriam obviously used her tambourine, and everybody rejoiced and they were free. And that is the story of Pesach and the 10 plagues. Listen to your mummies and daddies and do what they say. Listen to your mummies and daddies, please don't forget to pray. Listen to your mummies and daddies, our rabbis lead the way. Then they will be happy. Hope you've enjoyed everything we've done for Pesach. Take care, be good, listen to mummies and daddies, and enjoy your special time with them safely. Bye.